All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to No One Asked Us, episode 46. We've got Chris back this week. Chris missed our 1 year anniversary last week.
Did
Very,
I?
very upsetting. Yeah, it was
I
last
guess
week.
it's a theme for me. Don't tell my wife.
Okay. Chris doesn't make it to anniversaries. This week, we are fortunate enough to be joined by Amanda Tucker, who is the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Atlantic Bay Mortgage Group, where she leads enterprise risk management, regulatory and operational compliance, financial intelligence, and human capital functions. She's the person Atlantic Bay turns to for every new loan product, corporate partnership, and strategic decision that touches risk or compliance. Her career spans more than 2 decades in community financial institutions. Before Atlantic Bay, Amanda was Chief Operating and Risk Officer at Old Dominion National Bank. Earlier roles include Senior Vice President and Operational Risk Manager at Atlantic Union Bank, Director of AML and Fraud at Stellar One, Vice President of Compliance Community Bankers Trust. That's a mix of bank examiner, AML, fraud, and operational risk experience. Gives her a perspective most mortgage executives don't have. Amanda has been recognized as Housing Wire's Woman of Influence and a Housing Wire Vanguard Award winner. Under her leadership, Atlantic Bay launched Homebound, a down payment assistance grant program for first time home buyers in multicultural and underserved communities, and transitioned AB Cares into a private foundation. She also serves on the board of Community Home Lenders of America and is an active voice in industry forums, including ACAMS, the BSA Coalition, and the Mortgage Bankers Association. How did it do, Amanda?
It did pretty well. I was hoping maybe I got assigned some new roles or jobs while you're reading it. But if that's not the most exciting background for any of your guests you've ever had on before, I don't know.
It is for sure. No question about it, Amanda. So Amanda, we all joke on here like nobody grows up as a little boy or a little girl being like, I really want to get into mortgage. Except for a few apparently whose parents were already in it. But how did you find the mortgage industry?
So believe it or not, so my first professional role out of college was I was a regulator. I worked for the Massachusetts Division of Banks, and believe it or not, that was not my hope and dream come true growing up. I was fortunate enough. I did an internship with a judge in New York, and as I was nearing graduation, I was studying for the LSATs, but I really didn't want to honestly do 3 more years of school. And was asking him, what can I do? I've got a lot of student loans, and I've got to have some health insurance and a salary. And he put me in touch with a former classmate of his that was a deputy commissioner in Massachusetts. And so I went in for an interview. I went in and I honestly had no idea what a bank examiner did. None. Had tried to read up as much as I could, but spent 4 years working for the government. And honestly, it was a background and experience that gave me a foundation that I don't know that I would have found anywhere else. I mean, this was 16 plus years ago where we were spreading balance sheets manually, but you were really learning kind of how a financial organization was run, all of the different facets from a governance perspective, from a law perspective. So it was really fascinating, but I traveled every week. So for 4.5 years, I got up on Monday, left, and came home Friday. So I burned out on that, and
yeah, that's a lot.
came over to the private sector. And as you read, I held a variety of roles across kind of regulatory compliance, governance, risk management, information security. When I met the owners, Brian and Stan Holland of Atlantic Bay, I was looking to leave. I was commercial banking's tough. Reporting and kind of serving under a board of directors is really challenging. I was burned out. I had 2 little boys at home that I wanted to spend more time with. I was missing sporting events and school activities. And so when I came in and I met with Atlantic Bay, that was their first question is, you've had a great career. Why would you want to come do non-depository mortgage lending? And I just said, I want to be able to go to my kindergartner's class concert, right before Christmas.
Yeah.
And I loved, Atlantic Bay is so family first. We are community centric. I think when I first met Brian and Stan, I, drove back home after that interview, which lasted 5 hours. I've never had an interview go that long. But drove back home and I was like, gosh, does everyone who worked there really love it this much? Because I got to meet a bunch of different people, and everyone I talked to said, this is a really amazing place. And it almost seemed too good to be true, but I came to work here and it's honestly not. It's awesome. Now, do we have our challenges? Absolutely. You have ownership and leadership that truly care. And every decision that I see this ownership team make is really with their employee and community in mind. And that was just something that I think is so unique, whether you're working in banking or you're working in mortgage. It's just truly unique in this current environment.
Right. Yeah. Oh, no, 100%. There's no question about it. Especially with no shortage of AI layoffs that seem to be going on. So with that being said, I want to jump right into to the discussion, if that's okay.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
What was the wildest thing you saw when you were in a regulator back in the day?
I think it's probably been about 10 years since I've told this story, but it's been long enough, so I guess I can tell it again. So in Massachusetts, my territory was south of Boston. So I had Cape Cod and the islands, and everyone's like, that's so crazy. You get to go out to Cape Cod and you get to go to Martha's Vineyard and do bank exams. We went in January. Like, there was nothing awesome about getting on a ferry and we went out for 4 weeks. You couldn't come home. So we were doing an exam on one of the islands. It was this tiny community bank, and I was doing Bank Secrecy Act exams at the time. And this bank had a lot of issues. And so we're meeting with the board. We're walking through the issues. They're in enforcement territory. And I kid you not, the BSA officer threw a stapler at the exam, just picked it up. I don't think he meant to. And I mean, everyone's sliding away from the table. So I think I was maybe a year in. So I started at the agency when I was 22. So I was maybe 23 at the time. And
God.
Here you are delivering at 23, really serious exam results. And sure enough, so after that, we did not leave anything on the table.
Yeah, I would imagine clear out the.
Really, I think with money laundering and fraud, and we see this now in the mortgage space, it's occurring in the most unique places that you wouldn't expect. And a lot of what we were seeing flow through that bank were indicators of money laundering, and it was coming in right off the coast. So I think things like that, like this tiny community bank, you would never guess that it would be a hotbed of potentially illicit activity.
So was your job to essentially find these fraud rings and patterns?
Yeah, it was to go in and look at the safety and soundness of their programs, and then to assess kind of had they done the level of investigation and due diligence necessary. And we see this in our business and our engagement with state regulators is, they really are there to ensure that they're protecting the end consumer. I think sometimes you get some that maybe are more overzealous than is necessary. But yeah. I think ultimately it's the same as all of us, right? They're just trying to do the job that they have.
Makes sense. Cool.
And that's got to be a huge challenge for the smaller banks, especially as, these types of fraudulent rings become more and more sophisticated. And I imagine that the little tiny bank on the island, off the coast is not exactly outfitted with the most up-to-date methods to catch those types of things.
No, and I think that's one of the things that's really cool about what we're seeing today with technology, certainly with AI. 20 years ago, the price variance based on your asset size was so significant. To really afford sophisticated fraud and BSA technology, you had to be well into the billions. in terms of asset size or origination volume. I think now that there's more options on market where you don't have to necessarily be large. You probably have to know what you're looking for, what your needs are, and what your risk appetite is. But I think that's one of the biggest differences. There used to be some really fantastic anti-money laundering and fraud tools, but they were so expensive that you were priced out unless you were well over $1 billion.
Yeah, which is crazy. Okay, so we were talking before the show came on. I know a few folks over at Atlantic Bay, and I know that Atlantic Bay is one of the more forward thinking from technology perspective institutions in the space. And you guys, I don't know if you want to disclose how much of your tech stack you want to disclose here, but what is it like as a chief compliance risk officer who already had a full-time job trying to, with LOs and marketing and whatever, and loans being originated and so on and so forth. Now you've got a whole new animal that you have to worry about. Now you've got AI, and not only do you have compliance, but you've got security and you've got governance, right? So it's like you just got at least 2, if not 3 things kind of, dumped in your lap. Do you mind talking about, let's start, like, what was that first like when you guys first made the decision, like, hey, we're going to take this leap and we're going to start, making steps towards integrating AI into Atlantic Bay?
Yeah, so we started slowly, and actually my regulatory compliance and marketing compliance team was one of the first functional areas in the company to utilize AI. And so we actually, and I don't mind sharing this, we're huge proponents of this tool, and it's definitely moving the needle for us from an infrastructure perspective, reducing the steps that an LO will go through in terms of marketing compliance. So we did an early pilot with Active Comply's Trust Frame, and that's their AI tool where you take your marketing content, you drop it in, this wheel spins around, and it's like, yay, this is compliant, or it gives you all of the things that are non-compliant. And so our team started using that in 2025. Then our marketing team started using it. We're now in the process of rolling it out to our LOs. So it's self-serve on demand. I think utilizing that early on in the company's AI journey was helpful because the same team who has to design the AI governance, AI compliance is using it. So they can kind of get a feel for kind of working with AI, understanding the checks and balances, understanding how to validate the accuracy. And then we've slowly moved out from there. It's not without its challenges. One of the things I love about Atlantic Bay is we do empower our LOs to run their business on a one-to-one basis. And so we do have LOs that if they come through our process, they can engage third parties for certain services, whether it's CRM in nature, it's marketing compliance in nature, it's lead gen. And so we've seen a lot of AI flowing through that third-party channel that our LOs are bringing to us. And that's probably been the most challenging space. We are working on enterprise opportunities with our tech stack, but do understand, LOs are going to want the coolest, newest, shiniest tech that's out there. And we do empower them to do it if they come through the process.
Right. Which is, I wrote a article about this a month ago or so, about how I think we're now in a new technology race for organizations for recruiting. Because now, and I think the number they said, it was 54% of applicants are currently asking what AI tools will I have access to when they come into an organization. I won't name names, but I actually met with a branch manager a couple of weeks ago who left and this guy, they do like, I don't know, 110 million a month or something. And they left their originator strictly because of AI tools and they went to somewhere else, and their entire reasoning behind it was the AI tools that they had access to.
We see some of that usually with our chairman and president's club and on our annual sales trip. That's usually the business focus of our LOs is what are we doing with AI? How are we thinking about utilization of AI? Where are we looking to embed it within the organization? One of the things that we've talked about here was some concerns with AI is the pace of technology and then the pace of regulation. And so, one of the things that we're concerned with is we look at it as from a regulatory perspective, is AI going to be sort of the next offshoring, if you will? So the opportunity to utilize resources outside of the United States, in 2018, 2019, 2020, that was a really hot thing in the industry. We all started moving in that direction from a scalability perspective. And then in 2024 and 2025, we started seeing these states with state laws that really impacted the opportunity to leverage those resources. So we've been somewhat measured in how we're rolling out AI. Now, 2026, of course, we've already had Freddie seller servicer guidelines. Now we've got Fannie seller servicer guidelines. We've got an executive order. We've got states with their own state law. So it's just been kind of this soup of different requirements.
Right. So that brings up a question for me, which is what do you use as, your how you chart your guardrails, right? Because to your point, it's like the current administration hasn't really said much. I mean, there's been an EO, but we haven't seen anything out of Congress, which is a disappointment to say the friggin' least. But we've got some states that are out there, right? We've got, Colorado and California, most notably, who've kind of, put a stake in the ground. So when you think about compliance and AI, are you looking at like a Colorado or a California and saying, okay, this is what I want to adhere to? Or like, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so we're looking at it from a practical standpoint. I would say one of the concerns I have, and I've been pretty vocal about this, is we're seeing a lot of regulation of AI tech through existing federal law, TCPA, for example. So, Telephone Consumer Protection Act, I think, is probably more than 2 decades old. I don't think, as written, it was really intended for the evolution of where we are today from a technology, from an AI voice calling and text. It saw some amendments in 2024, but that's my concern is absent new federal regulation or a consistent framework, we're going to see regulation through existing laws that really weren't designed for it. So for us, with the Freddie Mac guidance that we saw at the end of 2025, I do think that was one of the first frameworks that really clearly laid out expectations across a broad range of areas. And so that was a relatively, I won't say easy framework to design and deploy, but it was clear. One of the challenges, of course, though, is we all had to comply by March 6th if you're a seller servicer. And just a couple of weeks ago, we have Here Comes Fannie with a set of guidelines that honestly does differ. We did an alignment between the two, and there are some areas where the two do differ. And so that's raised questions of, are you running 2 programs? Are you creating a program that addresses all of this, even if the program's at odds? So we have always tried to take the common sense approach. And so understanding kind of what specifically it is, we focus our AI program really across 3 categories for governance, is the utilization of the AI for information or knowledge. So is it helping employees inform how they complete tasks or how they come to work each day? Is it to render a decision? So that's more of your underwriting AI. Or is it consumer facing? And then depending on which of those categories we're in, understanding what sort of the governing bodies of law. But the one we're running up against most, and I think before we started, I had said this, I feel like almost my entire day, every day lately is talking through AI voice calling and texting and TCPA. I think to me that right now is probably the biggest challenge, where as an industry we're at odds. We have such a broad range of interpretation of what's required. And then you have state Telephone Consumer Protection Act laws that you're layering in underneath the federal. So I do think it's going to be more challenging. Our other concern is consumer litigation. I think we're starting to see consumer litigation with AI voice calling and texting emerge. I know there's some of the industries already feeling some of that. And from a cost perspective, that to me is where you really have issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you know Pete Bannister, who's one of the co-founders over at Mova AI. But I was talking to him last week, and it was really interesting. So Mova built an AI tool that listens to LO phone calls, and it basically coaches the LOs, right? But now what they're seeing is people are hiring Mova to be a third-party AI that's listening to the AI phone calls being made and then coaching against that. So now we've got the AI watching the AI, which was only a matter of time. Chris, you had a question.
Yeah, Amanda, can you give me the what came out of Freddie and Fannie, like what you're referring to, the guidance related to AI?
Yeah, so I think, Fannie at first read, it looked like they were taking more of the approach of, we want you to have an infrastructure that identifies opportunities to take a risk-based approach. Where Fannie's guidance differed from Freddie's, though, and Freddie's, I think, was more specific in terms of establishing the framework. They wanted a risk assessment. They wanted control monitoring. And so, I mean, we're all in this space. Can you imagine trying to design a monitoring program of all of the places in your organization that you use AI, and then the cadence of how you're monitoring that, whether it's from an accuracy integrity perspective, a consumer impact perspective? So Freddie's was really specific. Fannie's was I think a little bit more fluid in terms of allowing the organization to have best practices. Now, with that being said, some of the areas that Freddie was different from, or Fannie was different from Freddie, is in terms of vendor oversight. I think Fannie's guidance places sole and complete responsibility on the lender for its vendors' utilization of AI. And so that's been something that in recent months, working with our vendors, whether they're new and existing from a contract perspective, that's certainly created challenges. Fannie also departs from Freddie's guidance in their expectation of enterprise training around the utilization of AI and responsible use. And then the third place is identifying a person responsible for all of AI, which our leadership team met last week for our Q2 strategic planning, and we were sort of talking through that responsibility requirement. But right now, across our entire executive team, each of us is doing a different facet of AI. And so one of the challenges between the two, though, is, Freddie's guidance we had to comply with by March 6th. So we designed the whole program, we've rolled it out. And now here we are with Fannie's, which takes effect on August 6th. We're kind of like, well, dang it, like, do we have to go back and redo this? Because now we've got these areas that we didn't account for. So I think it'll be really interesting. I know from an advocacy standpoint, Atlantic Bay is doing a lot in the space to ask clarifying questions. We've had some great conversations with both agencies. We do understand there's going to be a period of time before either agency actively audits to the framework. I can appreciate that. I think most of the agency teams, I'll say on the ground, that we're all working with, have the perspective of they want lenders to be thinking through some of the potential risks really to the consumer, whether the consumer fully understands the role that AI is playing in their home loan process, or whether it's being used to render a decision, and could there be potential bias in how that decision's rendered?
Well, and I think they're having to, I used to be the policy chair for the largest PAC in the state of Utah, and being in the room with regulators in 2024 was hilarious. The way they wanted to regulate AI, it was some of the things I heard was not even making a boomer joke, Andrew, but the boomers were in there trying to regulate something they didn't understand, and it was quite comical. But we ended up establishing like the AI laboratory, like Discovery, to try and help these guys understand, because there's so many just simple definitions, by virtue of using a certain definition, it was so overarching. And so I think next year we're going to see some interesting regulation come out of Utah.
I think it's going to be interesting to see to your point, Amanda, the enforcement of this. Like, does anybody remember? Well, PK doesn't, he's too young. TRID. Remember when they first came out, and the auditors didn't know how to test for it. They were going to shops being like, shit, I don't know. Like, this thing's all new to me.
Oh, yeah. The black hole. Remember the black hole closing?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, are we going to see something similar with AI where everybody's like, shit, I don't know.
Well, I think what's really interesting, though, is, really, so if you're in the mortgage non-depository space, especially if you're an independent mortgage bank, you get the pleasure of however many states you're licensed in examinations. And so we're in 16 states today, and across those 16 states, we're seeing a lot of them deploy the Conference of State Bank Supervisors, non-depository cybersecurity procedures that have some AI questions, but now we're just adding yet another agency association to this mix. And to your point, Andrew, the interpretation by state of the same question is wildly different.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been, I don't think they know, honestly. I know the CSBS is going through a process to understand from the industry kind of their perspective on AI, how they're thinking about it to help inform the regulatory aspect. But that's probably our biggest concern is, are we going to get so far down the path with utilization and embedding AI within our business processes, and then all of a sudden we're gonna have all this regulation that we're then saying, well, I guess we're gonna undo this.
Do you think again, you guys are more forward thinking than a lot of folks in the space, but do you think that holds you back just a little bit, like in how fast you push? Like if I guess this is the way I put it, if the regulations were just crystal clear, right, and we all knew, like, okay, this is the rule set, this is the field, we know it, do you think you would push a little bit harder or faster on AI? Do you think you're a little bit slower, or not slower, but intentional?
You're asking the risk person, so I think we're moving very fast.
I was going to say, I bet her answer versus
lightning speed. No, I think, some of it, I think we're moving through it saying, what do we know today? And we're designing programs that are fluid enough that we can go back and adapt as necessary. I would say one of the delays that we're actually seeing is in engaging with some of our vendors to either enhance existing services or begin new services. We're getting in a line where the wait is several months. And so that's one of the other challenges I think we're faced with is, you're getting in line today, end of April, to deploy certain technology mid-summer, but has that technology even been replaced by something new that's emerging? And so some of our challenges are the delays that we're seeing in deploying, because collectively the industry is moving in this direction.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Go ahead, PK, please.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think historically what I've seen in the last couple of years talking to like compliance folks is that there's like 1,000 rules, and then you have like 2 or 3 people to like comply to these rules, and there's like more rules than you can actually manage. And for I mean, there are definitely like, technology out there for kind of your core compliance tasks, but then there's also like all these other things that are currently either happening offshore or manually, essentially onshore. Um, I'm curious, like, are you seeing like, you shared obviously the Act Lab Comply example where from a marketing perspective, but internally within your own teams, are you seeing tools being either spun up internally or your vendors providing you tools for tasks that are currently still happening manually, where your team has to push every button, to where it's all being automated. So my theory is that with with this kind of AI push is that you'll be able to be more compliant, because I don't think it's more of a scale of like how compliant you are. I think my thesis is that you'll be able to be more compliant for a fraction of the cost. But I don't know if that's actually playing out in the field for you.
Yeah, so our teams on the regulatory compliance and legal side have been doing a lot of analysis in terms of leveraging ChatGPT in their daily workflows and to query certain information. I made the joke last week. I was like, if anyone goes and looks at my ChatGPT history, it's going to look like I don't know how to do it. Because it's like, what is TCPA? But we're using it to see based on how we query it and then kind of aligning it to the regulation. And is it giving us the streamlined information with a certain degree of accuracy that we need? We're also embedding it more so from a project management task workflow perspective. I would say within risk and compliance functions, where we're seeing it move the needle the most is with the preliminary review of legal documents. It is streamlining and kind of popping out a summary of the legal document. We're using tools where we can input the company's contract management philosophy. And then when we drop a new contract in, it tells us really quickly if there's areas that it's out of alignment. So that's been huge from a time-saving perspective. I do think that as we continue to see it evolve, there's going to continue to be an increase in utilization. Really on the fraud side, that's probably the place that we've seen kind of the most traction, is the opportunity to leverage AI and technology to identify indicators of fraud. But as quickly as we're seeing that technology emerge, we're also seeing utilization of AI to perpetrate fraud. The biggest area there we still see kind of, I think, an opportunity with technology is with synthetic fraud. I do think that's one that is still, they're leveraging AI to perpetrate it, but AI is not capturing it.
Yeah. I think ultimately though, the tech catching will win, right? Because now we're at a point where we can, there are electronic signatures for altered documents, which I think, now we're actually in a much better position. I mean, I would say, from a risk and a compliance side, looking long term, I mean, I talk short term about, the pains, right, of dealing with everything that's coming out. But ultimately, long term, you should, really end up in a world in which all of your data is being processed through AI engines so that all risk and compliance can be found. The things that typically slip past a person don't slip past the machine.
I think like this brings up to like the source data conversation. Andrew, you play a lot with like the image generators and things like that, but like I'm guessing like very soon, if not already now, you could probably generate a bunch of fake checks, fake
oh yeah, I can go generate a whole set of fake tax returns in W-2s.
Yeah,
but the key,
you're a little quick there, Andrew.
Calm down. You can notice this.
He's like, you got to use this model over here.
Yeah, exactly. GPT-2, it's the best image generator now. Way to go. Yeah, but there's still a digital signature on the document, right? So it's like how LinkedIn flags anything that you've got that's created with AI. LinkedIn will catch it because it just runs through a simple filter when it gets uploaded. from that perspective. But I think this is why it's so critical that you have those tools in place, right? So like now I would ask every IMB and bank out there, what are you doing to process your image files to ensure that you're actually checking for these digital signatures to make sure that the documents haven't been altered by AI, right? That's just that.
Yeah, I think with enough or sufficient motivation, you could get rid of those watermarks and things like that.
I don't know. I'm not the. I need Tim. I need somebody smarter than me to make a comment on that one. We all know I'm the dumbest person on this phone call. By a long shot. Amanda, what do you think is an area that people in compliance and risk are not talking enough about when it comes to AI? Like, are there things that like on the like, you know, we all talk about state regulations and Fannie and Freddie and things of that nature, but is there anything you feel like people are just not talking enough about that needs a little bit more attention on it?
I do think consumer consent in TCPA is probably the space that I think in the last couple of weeks, I'm hearing more conversation around it. When we started, I'm calling it our AI voice journey. When we started on our AI voice journey, you know, where we really ran into issues was the consumer consent piece, more so from our portfolio perspective. And so we started having conversations with vendors and other industry leaders. And the really interesting part of that is everyone really had a different perspective on consumer consent, what TCPA requires. Are you required under federal law to have that AI disclosure that this is an AI voice generated call? So I do think that's one space where there's not been enough conversation. And to me, the risk there is that's a law. I mean, we're already here, right? We have TCPA at the federal level. We have a number of states with TCPA state iterations. And so if you're looking at enforcement and litigation, the opportunity is already there. I do think we'll see more of the conversation. I'm starting to see it kind of manifest in more, you know, conferences and podcasts and that type of thing. So I think people are starting to think about it, but I also think that's because you have more of the well-known vendors coming to market with AI voice assistant and with the calling and texting. So I think you're seeing it from larger companies now being offered, whereas previously, I'd say 12 months ago, we were only seeing it really from smaller third-party companies that had just recently popped up.
Do you guys actively have an AI voice dialer making calls for your broker or LOs?
We are in the process of deploying it.
Okay, so you haven't actually, okay.
We currently do texting.
Okay.
Which was why when we rolled that out, we had a lot of people who, our AI voice agent is Alex, and everyone was like, who is this Alex person and why are they sending me text messages? And so it was, even though it says like, this is Alex, your AI chatbot, but it's been kind of wild to roll it out. So we did texting first, and that did give us a lot of lessons learned from a consumer facing standpoint. So we're in the process of doing voice.
So what was the success like in the texting?
Initially, all we heard at the executive level was like all of the consumers who called in really confused and concerned. But I think at the end of the day, we're talking about 20 consumers or less. And so
right. So you're going to get complaints no matter what you do.
So we are seeing it generate some conversations. We are seeing them kind of engage with the bot, and we are seeing some conversion. But I think some of it is looking at it with different campaign segments in terms of which part of your portfolio or customer base you're looking to kind of engage in conversation. Initially, we took more of the perspective of this is an opportunity to give them meaningful information about kind of their existing home, information with respect to what's going on in the environment. Is there an opportunity to refinance the value of their home? And so we haven't kind of started yet with the voice calling. We're really looking to do more, I think, in terms of outreach to our portfolio, more so from a recapture perspective.
I am very, very curious to hear how that goes. I am like, I feel like I'm the optimist, when it comes to most things AI. I'm not sold on outbound voice AI, but that's also because I don't answer my phone. Does anybody who on this actually, how many of you answer your phone when it's an unknown number?
Well, now iPhone has like that thing where it's like it makes you read it out.
I understand, but how many of you answer a phone? Because I literally have a setting on my iPhone that puts all unknown numbers directly into voicemail immediately.
Well, that's not who's going to answer this phone call.
Right. That's my whole, and I'm not saying I'm just one person, right? So I'm not saying it's not going but I'm just going to be really curious to see, because it does seem like I applaud you guys for having done AI in a lot of other places before you went to voice. I have seen a lot of people we have talked to. Like, I even approach a lot of people and they're like, "Oh, do you do voice?" And we're like, "No." And they're like, "Yeah, never mind. Don't want to talk to you." Like, there is a laser focused on outbound AI voice calling right now in the industry. And I'm not saying it's not going to give lift, but I just wonder, is that really the place that there should be your first place to go? I guess. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it altogether, but I think it's an interesting choice as your first place to go with AI.
And just side note, I don't know if you saw, but OpenAI created a voice LLM yesterday, and they launched it open source, so you could eventually talk to Bob.
Yeah, we'll get there.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I was trying to schedule a doctor's appointment for my kids the other day, and I was probably a solid 5 minutes into the call when I realized it was an AI voice agent. And I just kept hitting zero. I'm like, oh, I just want to do this. So I do worry about consumer borrower frustration if, we're going to disclose that this is an AI generated voice call, and please press, 2 to speak to a loan officer. But I just worry how many consumers are going to hang up. At least the text messages, I'll read those.
Yeah.
So I think starting in text, I think, was absolutely the business decision that made the most sense for us. We are getting, to your point, Andrew, though, the demand right now from our LOs to have a voice AI.
Oh, I know where it's coming from.
And they're going out and finding their own solution. We had one that came through the other day. I was like, I've never even heard of this. The company just started a few months ago. And so, I mean, and we want to make sure that we're giving them the tools that they need. But I do wonder about the success rate.
Do you have to disclose either on text or voice that it is AI?
Yeah.
Yeah. So under some of the 2024 changes, you were supposed to, but this is one of the areas where I do think the industry's had different perspectives of, do you or don't you? Is it state dependent? And then what do you have to say? We've sort of taken the approach of to not run into consumer transparency issues, to not run into consumer consent issues. We're just going to say this is an AI generated voice call at the outset of all outbound calls, regardless of which state they're either originating in and which state the consumer number would indicate that they're in. That's the other challenge, with some of this from a state framework perspective is, I know my mobile number is still a Boston area code from 25 years ago. So when we're looking at kind of outreach to consumers, if we're going off the area code that the number is, they could be a Virginia area code, they could be in California, which is going to have very different laws. And so we've tried to take an approach that kind of applies the strictest level of compliance. That's another conversation that we've seen a lot emerging in the industry is, do you just go state by state? I don't see from a scalability or efficiency standpoint how you go state by state. I mean, you'd have to have
No.
compliance teams that only work certain states, and I can't imagine that level of compliance.
Well,
Yeah, also, that's why SB 53 out of California is like seen as the grail. Like everybody's going to follow that. Like it is going to be basically federal law. Like just basically what you just said.
Amanda, you mentioned earlier how like I think it's Fannie or Freddie expects you to have like one person on the executive team that is like, you know, basically that's whose person the head will
who's
roll
going to
if
jail?
yeah that person, right? Like I guess like I don't know, if I'm an executive and I'm already working there and like it's kind of a big burden to be able to be like, okay, I'm going to be that person that's
Right.
like my head's going to roll if something goes wrong. So like, and then it would be my responsibility to like, you know, be on the bleeding edge and spend essentially my day to day doing that. But I've got other responsibilities to do as well. So like, what's kind of like the internal kind of like dialogue looking like there? Because I'm sure you're not
Well,
the only person.
when I ask the question, everyone's like, doo, 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 doo. No, I mean, a lot of how I think that's a great question. And honestly, that's something that through some of our advocacy efforts with CHLA, we're hoping to clarify in the coming weeks with Fannie. It's very broadly written. So we had the conversation of, is it our chief strategy officer who oversees technology? Is it our president who oversees research and development, which is where a lot of our AI work is being done? Is it me who oversees AI governance? I kind of have a feeling I'm going to be like the lucky winner. I think we're probably going to take the approach of the person responsible is really going to be the person who oversees the governance, so the control measures that the company's deploying. But we'll probably do it's this person, but this person and this person are also involved.
Amanda, when's the last time you reviewed their D&O policy? Have you taken a look at that?
You know what? Thankfully, I work on that too. So I'm like, just make sure this gets renewed come June. Maybe increase the coverage.
Well, I mean, I think that brings up the question, which is maybe not now, but inside of the next, let's call it year or two, do you think it's going to become more critical that institutions have that, you know, let's call it chief AI officer? Like, because I kind of feel like bringing AI on and making it everybody like, it is sort of like if you were to bring on like Encompass and have no administrator for it.
Right.
Right. Like that's like the closest correlation I can kind of come up with.
You also have to have like you know, like a dichotomy of like a person who's going to be like the go-getter, like, you know, like, hey, let's implement this in all the nooks and crannies of their business. But then you also have to have someone who's going to be like, should we, and like, what are the controls?
Right.
And things like that. So it can't just be like all forward, you know, forward thinking. You have to have like some level of like responsibility.
Well, that was what was really, you know, Freddie's guidance was more so tell us, you know, from a roles and responsibilities standpoint, who is evaluating AI, who is deploying AI, and then who is overseeing the governance. And so I think Freddie did take an approach where it was more so appreciative that right now it's not realistic that an organization is going to have one person, PK to your point, doing all of those things. So it's definitely, I would say, one of the things that we saw as a departure in Fannie's guidance that we have questions on. It was an entertaining 15-minute conversation last week as we were sort of kind of fighting it out over who got to be responsible. One other thing I was going to mention is, we brought up D&O and insurance, and I hadn't heard this until maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm curious if you guys did, but lenders now having to carry certain AI coverage, more so from a threat and ransom perspective. I had not seen that.
Oh, interesting.
That is wild.
I haven't seen it, but I believe it.
Yeah.
They're writing it now, and my understanding is they're writing it now in cyber liability policies. You know how you can have like your ransom and threat. So if someone's physically kidnapped, well, now it's if AI attempts to steal some of your data and then ransom it back to you. So yeah, that was something that that's new for 2026. I cannot imagine the price tag on that.
Thank you. You just gave me another thing that we have to worry about, which is the AI playing ransom to get Bitcoin so that it can buy things on the internet. I hope my AI doesn't have a shopping problem. It's slightly terrifying on that front.
Yeah, I think that's gonna the cybersecurity thing. I think industry historically has had a couple breaches in the last couple of years, and there were some big fines and things like that. One, I guess, like hole, or I guess, like, to poke a hole here is essentially, it's like, a lot of people, you mentioned like some of your LOs are bringing in their own voice agents and things like that. It's like, well, if you don't have any sort of governance over that, then that potentially might expose either your own tech stack or your client's data to whatever that piece of technology is and whoever built that. And like, there could be that's essentially an attack vector for some bad actors. If they were highly motivated, they could be like, hey, here are LOs, like, here's like a free voice tool that you could use. And LOs don't really like paying for technology, so they're going to be like, oh, let's use that. And then next thing you know, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of borrower data out there, possibly as like an attack vector. So we have some interesting challenges ahead.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think Amanda's. Yeah, you're. That's Amanda's fears. Like, what are the hell about?
What's everyone doing?
Well, and we also need to remember that like the AI we're dealing with is basically like a Model T Ford, right? Like
Right.
It's only going to get better.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
it's
worse,
it's Sam
depending on how you
Altman's
put it.
quote from a couple of years ago. Remember when he was like, "This is the worst AI will ever be."
Yeah.
And even I forget, that we're really, quite frankly, we're in year 3 or 4 of this, right? I mean, the original GPT came out in November of 22. So we're not really that far removed from it. So it's like, what does the stack look like 24 months from now?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the question I'm starting to ask myself, especially because like we keep watching Claude and like all of the moves and Claude seems to kind of be right now, at least in the front, I feel like, from where it's going, because GPT seems to now be just copying whatever Anthropic does to a degree. And again, like, what does it look like 2 years from now from an AI perspective? Because I think right now we're injecting a lot of AI into SaaS. And I actually wrote a post about this morning, which nobody will read because I actually spent time on it. But do we get to an AI operating system environment? And what does that look like? Like, what is the next? But on that piece, there's another question I have, which is, it's really easy. Well, not easy, but like when you're bringing on an AI provider like us or somebody else, like you're like, oh, okay, it's an AI provider. I know I need to do X, Y, Z, right? And I need to worry about, how do they track this and where's this audit trail and whatnot. How do you handle, or do you get worried about other vendors that are non-AI vendors that start using AI, but you're not actually aware of the fact that they're using AI in their process? And like, how are you protected as do you get where I'm going with this? Like, as a vendor, like, oh shit, so-and-so slipped AI into my tech stack and I didn't even know that they did it.
Well, so now I'm terrified because of this new Fannie Mae guidance, because even if they do that, it's our responsibility. I would say maybe 12 months ago, we started thinking of it from the perspective of actually writing into a lot of the contracts we were signing. So if the vendor was not using AI, there is a notification requirement if they begin to utilize AI anywhere in their stack. And so when we do get those incoming notifications, it pushes out some additional requests to them. We've had conversations from our third-party coverage perspective to say, are we covered if we've
Right.
contractually asked them to tell us. But that part does terrify me. I think most of them are so excited to talk about where they're using AI or if they're beginning to use it that they
That's
are
a good
reaching
point.
out.
Yeah.
I worry about it more so where it's being utilized to touch or interact with data more so to create kind of staffing efficiencies on the vendor side where they wouldn't necessarily want to disclose it because it's not, wild and exciting. But that is something that I don't know that beyond the contract, we've really identified a sound way other than engaging in kind of your annual vendor due diligence, which I think across agencies and even regulators at this point, it really, and I say this having come over from the bank side, and while it's been 8 years, I think the mortgage industry, specifically IMBs, we're now seeing vendor compliance requirements that really the banks have honestly been under for 10 plus years. But it is newer to the IMB space. And so I think that's creating some challenges as well.
Got it. Okay.
Fascinating.
So we got a few minutes left. First up is Josh Lear. Question. He actually had 2 questions for you from last week. I think we may have answered the first one, which was Claude GPT or Grok. Sounds like you're a GPT.
So I had been. We just.
Are you both? Are you both?
We're all 3. So it's gonna make everyone nervous since I just said I might be the person responsible for AI. We were using GPT. Got really comfortable with it. We are just recently engaging at the enterprise level with Claude. And
so you guys are going to switch from, because you are an enterprise GPT.
We are enterprise GPT. We're going to go parallel paths. But when we started the process with Claude, I had to have my cybersecurity team sit me down and explain it to me. But we're using Grok a little bit, but mostly it's been
interesting.
GPT and Claude. We have a research and development function that is kind of home to all of our awesome creativity. And so they're looking at different products. They're looking at different opportunities to utilize it. It sits outside of the core business. So they're not doing it with real or live data, real or live technology. Right. So we're going to begin testing some of the enterprise use of Claude there first. But I do expect it, for some of the reasons you mentioned, to kind of outpace the use of GPT.
Yeah. I mean, Chris and PK have been trying to get me on Claude for like a year, and I finally made the switch a couple of months ago, and we all joke that Andrew's got a serious addiction to Claude. At this point, I don't like to leave my laptop. Okay. So last but not least, Amanda, next week's guest, episode 47, is Richard Greaser from Monster Leads. Although I think did they get rebranded? I don't know. PK, you would know.
Yeah, they're called LoanSure.
LoanSure. Thank you. What would you like to ask him, Amanda?
I think I'd love to hear what he views as the single best opportunity for the industry as it relates to use of AI in marketing. That's something we've had a lot of conversations around, and everyone has a different perspective. So I'd like to hear his thoughts.
All right, there we go. That is a good question for sure. Amanda, thank you so much. This has been phenomenal. Like if people want to actually, have a good sense of what's going on in the compliance space with AI, this is going to be a phenomenal episode. I certainly am walking away smarter than when we started this. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see everybody back here next week for episode 47 with Richard.